The Fast Market. I'm Alex Coffey. It's now time for our cash tag segment. Joining me here in studio is TD Ameritrade Network contributor Jenny Horn. The co-host of Fast Market still with us, Kevin Hinks, and joining us from LikeFolio.com is their VP of Research, Megan Brantley. Good morning to all of you. Jenny, this is one of my favorite topics, admittedly, in terms of talking about a space. It's a growing world. It's been completely normalized from kind of the taboo nature of it. Just in the last few years, it's got a trajectory in terms of legalization, so you can see where dominoes are starting to fall. That being said, what makes it interesting is there's a battle within this space. Who's going to win? How many are going to emerge? And I think that's where social data and kind of sentiment around things really play a major factor. So we're talking sports gaming, we're talking Draftkings, we're talking Penn National. Set us up here.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree. This is one of my favorite spaces to talk also, and I think for that reason it reflects very much on social media where this name gets a ton of noise. I'm excited to hear from LikeFolio, but Draftkings, like you mentioned, has had quite the year. I mean, it IPO'd only back in April of 2020, and we've seen it sort of run up. I think so many people were at home just spending more time on different apps, but then also when we saw the sort of pause of sports, I think there was this resurgence in interest in so many sports so that people were, more invested in potentially online gaming. And for that reason, both Draftkings and Penn alike had a very, very strong year. Now they've seen some slowdown in 2021. I mean, Draftkings is down over 11% this month so far. So what a lot of analysts and investors are saying is, what will drive it higher? Because keep in mind, Draftkings is still very busy, regardless of some of the recent price activity. They are expanding their deals rapidly. They just announced an expanded deal with the MLB to include the live streaming of their games on their app, which marks its first live streaming deal with a major professional sports league. They also just introduced this new bet and watch streaming integration with the MLB, which gives fans on MLB.com and Draftkings accounts to watch one free live game per week. Plus, in May, they became the first official daily fantasy sports partner of 23XI Racing, and now they're the official sports sponsor of Bubba Wallace, who is a big name in that space. Plus, in April, I mean, it just goes on and on. They announced they're the official partner of the NFL. They renewed a lot of their contracts with the NFL to promote more daily sports content. And I think this is more in your and Kevin's wheelhouse, Alex. They also have this partnership deal with Bryson DeChambeau, which I think has brought, a non-traditional brand to the game of golf that typically is, more traditional. So they are very busy in this space. I mean, all these different partnerships, and many are saying, why is this not necessarily reflected in some of the stocks action as of the last few months? But I saw some noise on social media today that had me thinking and got me very excited, not so much for the fall and the weather, but for maybe football season, because many are saying that fantasy football this year could potentially drive this name, higher, get it out of sort of its most recent rut. So that brings me to our first tweet of the day, which says, my favorite option plays right now are Draftkings for the fall, #football. I'm in on the September and the Octobers. So I love this because, it does seem like the fall is well away, but if you look at a longer term trade, that is something to obviously keep in mind. But our next tweet focuses more on the sports betting space as a whole, which is, like Alex mentioned, has gotten a lot of attention over the last 12 months. So our next tweet says, Kathy Wood and ARK Invest estimate the U.S. sports betting market will grow from $9.5 billion to $37 billion by 2025, according to Bloomberg. So this would obviously be an astronomical level of annual growth. This would benefit both Penn and Draftkings alike. So Megan, I am curious to see if your data shows the sports betting market as a whole really growing at this astronomical rate, or if this is maybe, a lot of times Kathy Wood and ARK Invest are sometimes, pent up and it's, astronomical numbers that maybe don't come to fruition. But I'm curious to know if sports betting is growing at the same rate.
We are showing some significant levels of growth. We have mentions of people who are actually talking about placing a bet online on sports up about 20% year over year. So I think that that's still pretty healthy growth, but maybe not astronomical. But a lot of that is dependent on this accessibility and, is this legal? Is this an activity that all consumers can participate in? And so I think that that's kind of a key growth driver of this sports betting, activity is just, can you do it? Can you download the app on your phone? Like right now I can't, but I think that you guys can because you're in Illinois. So I think it just depends on where you're located. We looked at all of the players in this space, and these are mentions of people who are actually using these different online betting platforms. And just some background, what's interesting here, we like to talk about purchase intent, but part of that is scoring and listening for what people are talking about. What would indicate that someone is, spending money with one of these platforms? So, are they betting on DraftKings? Are they placing a bet on DraftKings? Things like that. We had to create a totally new scoring category, and we started adding and tracking these companies because these were different than the previous names that we've tracked. And what you can see from a volume perspective is that DraftKings has an edge. They've recorded some pretty significant year-over-year growth on our end. I think we have that pacing up over 60% year over year, which is pretty in line with what their revenue projections are for the next quarter. And so I think that this is one area where if you're looking at, okay, who is taking the lead right now in our data, we have DraftKings ahead of the pack. These are those purchase intent mentions like I was talking about, people actually using the platform to place a bet, to engage in wagering or whatever activity they may be doing, and those are up about 62% year over year for the quarter that just ended on June 30th. So that's pretty strong. If we were to generate our earnings score today, it'd be at about a 73, which is a pretty bullish signal. Obviously, they don't report for about another month, so this gives us a little bit of leeway and a little bit of time to, consider a position, and also just watch this, especially as the Olympics are coming up, to see, is this another kind of unseasonal activity that could continue to drive maybe even unexpected growth in some of these names.
Sixth. But my question to you is, these companies seem to be doing extremely well and just being a quintessential growth company, right? They show all the signs of a growth company, but they're in a little bit of a, almost like a sin category, right? Like liquor, like tobacco, like all these other things. Does that hold up some of the favorability of these names? Or with a younger crowd and with fantasy football and online gambling and iGaming and all these other things, is this just a stock or a company or a sector that's creating its own image in the world? And where does FanDuel come into play in this? We're talking about DraftKings and PENN National. FanDuel, is that a distant third? It looks like these two are the leaders, with DraftKings being like the Home Depot to the Lowe's in terms of PENN National Gaming, but they're both doing well here, right?
Yeah, they are. If you look, they have similar growth rates and they have similar volume levels. From a sentiment perspective, we have DraftKings about 5 points higher in regard to consumer happiness. So in that sense, that's where we're getting a little bit of an edge for DraftKings. Just they're making their consumers happier as opposed to FanDuel. I think it's interesting to see that Barstool Bets, that's that PENN element on that chart that you're looking at there, just because this is their, apples to apples online betting platform that you would think of whenever you think of a DraftKings or you think of a FanDuel. And you can see that volume is much lower. However, it is a much higher sentiment level. When we look at that, we see sentiment even 10 points higher than that of DraftKings. So I think that Barstool, that acquisition and that integration of that media brand has been really interesting because it's really driving consumer interest, and not just the Barstool brand, but also, other elements of PENN National. So from a long-term perspective, PENN National now has this content engine. They have this sports betting platform. So they are well positioned moving forward. This is an industry, I think, that's done a really good job of kind of branding itself. Jenny touched on a lot of those partnerships that they're doing, partnerships with the MLB. They've got, DraftKings is partnered or integrated within Dish and Sling and different streaming devices. So I think it's more normalized. We're definitely seeing more and more people talk about it in a normal sense. So I don't think that there is as much of a stigma there as there is to even other types of just regular gambling, just because the fantasy leagues and this, this consumer interest in, this almost gamification has been really sticky. So this is definitely something that we'll continue to monitor. But from our perspective, on a short-term lens, DraftKings is definitely outperforming in this space. It's got the highest volume, the strongest growth, and the more happy consumers comparatively, considering the volume of Barstool Bets is so much lower. However, long term, we do like PENN's positioning because you have this solid, loyal base in Barstool that's able to generate interest and has potential to grow. So it will be really interesting to see kind of how these all shake up. But right now, yeah, if we were to rank these, obviously we've got DraftKings as our near term kind of one that's leading the pack. And then we also long-term have an eye on PENN National because we like its diverse exposure in the gambling sphere as a whole.
Megan, there's really not a whole lot left to say. I think that was a brilliant breakdown of all of this, and it was actually along the lines of what I was going to say. Don't write off necessarily this Barstool Bets off on the bottom because the Barstool Sports brand, love it or hate it, is one of the strongest, most rabid fan bases of a brand that there is in terms of engagement in product. And so, Barstool and PENN National may always be a distant third, but they're going to have a very loyal I guess, user base, and it's going to be a happy user base just simply because of its association with that Barstool brand. But how much you would say, as you kind of gave us the setup here, how you feel about these companies, do you feel the DraftKings FanDuel edge right now has been first mover advantage, and that not just on Barstool bets, but rather the legacy players in gambling as well, your Caesars Palace type companies that really were ripe for disruption and maybe got caught off guard by the success of these companies in DraftKings and FanDuel?
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I think that, the fact that this DraftKings and FanDuel, especially the partnerships that they've been able to wrangle in and the positioning and just the exposure to consumers who maybe previously would have never considered this. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to go look at a Caesars online sportsbook per se. However, if I'm following along, watching a baseball game and I see that there's a partnership with DraftKings and maybe I want to place a bet and that's available to me, like that seems fun. That seems something like I would be open to. So you've got, I think, a much wider potential consumer base in that sense, which is really smart. But DraftKings definitely, I think, had a first mover advantage versus the Barstool Bets. But I guess one way to look at it is Barstool Bets has plenty of room to grow. And then now it's just a matter of, can DraftKings keep growing at the pace that they have been? Right now, our data shows, continued robust growth, especially approaching this quarter. I think they report in about a month. And so right now, that earnings signal, as I mentioned before, it's about a 73. So that's really strong for us. Whenever we rate those, we're looking, negative 100 to positive 100. So something in the realm of the 70s is pretty high. Obviously, that can change as we approach, closer to the actual earnings event. But we especially like where DraftKings is now, especially considering the recent, drop in the share price.
Megan, I have no doubt that we'll have this conversation more times in the future. A great space to monitor, and we'll look forward to those conversations. The VP of Research at LikeFolio.com, Megan Brantley. Guys, just to set the record straight here, you mentioned Bryson DeChambeau. Those who are golf fans know there's a bit of a feud going. I don't want to speak for Kevin, but I'm not on the team Bryson DeChambeau side. I'm much more on the Brooks Koepka side. Kevin, I have a feeling you're on the other side, though.
Yeah, and here's why I am. I measure people like that by who they hang out with. And the fact that Phil Mickelson and Bryson DeChambeau are so close makes me think, because we don't know what's in the inner circle or what's in their mind, but the fact that Mickelson hangs out with DeChambeau makes me think that DeChambeau is probably a solid guy.
Hey, I like the logic.
I like
the logic, but I'll use the same logic. Who would I rather hang out with? And I'd rather hang out with Brooks Koepka.
It's fair.
But hey, guys,
I like the smart guys.